What if the United States decided to take Venezuela's oil? Not with sanctions, not with pressure, but with a direct, full-scale military occupation. The premise sounds simple on a strategist's whiteboard. The world's largest reserves, a hemisphere away from rival powers, for the taking. But the real world does not operate on a whiteboard. Let us walk through the scenario, not as fiction, but through the lens of real deployments, real terrain, and real political calculus. The hook is not speculative. The United States maintains contingency plans for every major resource-rich nation. Venezuela is no exception. The immediate trigger is imagined: a total collapse of state authority, an imminent hostile power securing the oil fields, or a manufactured humanitarian pretext. The order is given. The machinery which exists begins to move. Phase 1 is the air campaign and naval blockade. Carrier strike groups position off the Venezuelan coast. From Diego Garcia and the continental US, stealth bombers and cruise missiles target command and control, integrated air defenses, and the state oil company, PDVSA's critical infrastructure. The goal is decapitation and paralysis. On paper, this phase is a foregone conclusion. Venezuelan forces, while large on paper, are poorly maintained and riddled with corruption. Their Soviet-era systems are decades behind. Air superiority is established within 72 hours. Then comes the amphibious and airborne assault. The northern coastline, from Maracaibo to the Paraguaná Peninsula, becomes the landing zone. The 82nd Airborne secures key airports inland. The objective is clear and narrow: seize the oil infrastructure, the wells, the refineries, the export terminals, with surgical speed. The initial resistance is sporadic. Conventional Venezuelan army units, offered clemency or overwhelmed by precision fire, melt away. Within 2 weeks, the prize is physically held by U.S. Marines and Army units. This is where the whiteboard scenario ends, and reality begins. The first reality is terrain. Venezuela is not the desert plains of Iraq. It is a country of immense geographical complexity. The Andean mountains in the west, the vast Amazonian jungles in the south, and the sprawling Orinoco belt, where the heavy oil reserves lie, is a hot, remote, and difficult morass. Holding the points on a map is one thing. Securing the thousands of square miles of pipelines, pumping stations, and extraction sites is another. It requires a footprint not of tens of thousands, but of several 100,000 troops, indefinitely. The second reality is the regional response. While some governments may quietly acquiesce, the public backlash across Latin America would be immediate and volcanic. It would resurrect the deepest grievances of gunboat diplomacy and Yankee imperialism. Brazil and Colombia, despite their own tensions with Caracas, would be forced into a posture of fierce diplomatic condemnation and likely facilitate covert support to any resistance. The organization of American states would shatter. China and Russia, while not intervening directly, would unleash a tsunami of diplomatic, cyber, and economic countermeasures, providing a continuous lifeline of intelligence, funding, and propaganda to the opposition. But the most significant reality is the human one. The initial victory over the Venezuelan state does not create control. It creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum flows not gratitude, but a hydra of insurgency. Loyal remnants of the Venezuelan military blending into the population. The colectivos, armed civilian groups with intimate knowledge of urban labyrinths like Caracas's barrios. Criminal syndicates whose smuggling routes are disrupted. They would not fight a conventional war. They would fight the war. They are built for improvised explosives on supply routes, sniper fire against refinery perimeter patrols, mortar attacks on compound housing, and kidnappings of foreign oil technicians. The occupation force transitions from conqueror to garrison. Every convoy needs armor and air cover. Every soldier on patrol is a target in a population where resentment simmers just beneath the surface of forced compliance. The cost, measured in blood and treasure, begins its steep, inexorable climb. The oil, the original objective, now requires more money to protect than it can generate on the global market. Production plummets as sabotage becomes a daily event. The world watches as the United States finds itself trapped in another quagmire, but this time in its own hemisphere, with no easy exit and a unified front of global condemnation. The occupation settles into a grim rhythm. Year 1 passes. The insurgency, fueled by national pride, external support, and sheer survival does not diminish. It adapts. The US military controls the daylight and the main highways. The night and the labyrinthine networks of alleys, jungles, and mountains belong to the resistance. The economic cost crosses into the hundreds of billions. The human cost, in casualties and psychological toll, becomes a domestic political crisis. War fatigue sets in, not over a decade, but in months. Multiple realistic outcomes now emerge from the fog. The first is the stalemate. The US cannot withdraw without losing all strategic face and triggering a regional crisis worse than the invasion. But it cannot pacify the country enough to make the oil flow profitably. It becomes a bleeding ulcer, a permanent drain on power and prestige, emboldening adversaries globally who witness the limits of sheer military might. The second outcome is the fragmentation. Unable to hold the entire country, the US consolidates its hold on the key oil regions of Zulia and the Orinoco Belt, effectively carving out a resource protectorate. The rest of the country descends into a failed state, a haven for warlords and traffickers, creating a permanent zone of instability that spills refugees and violence across all of South America. The mission of securing oil has instead manufactured a larger, more dangerous security threat on the continent's doorstep. The third and most likely outcome is the negotiated retreat. Facing unsustainable costs and domestic upheaval, a new administration seeks a face-saving exit. It negotiates with whatever fractured political entity can be assembled, leaving behind a shattered Venezuela, but one where the oil contracts are now shared with international partners from neutral countries, and where US influence is permanently, irreparably damaged. The net result is a strategic loss. The oil is not taken. It is simply denied to everyone for a generation, and America's standing is diminished. The final takeaway is not about military tactics, but about the nature of power in the 21st century. Raw conquest is a bankrupt concept. True power is not the ability to seize, but the ability to control, to administer, and to sustain. It is the intersection of logistics, local legitimacy, and long-term political will. Venezuela's oil, for all its volume, is not a prize waiting on a shelf. It is embedded in a nation, a society, and a geography that conspire to make its theft more expensive than its value. The scenario reveals a profound truth. The greatest constraint on any superpower is not another military, but the inevitable friction of reality itself. The cost of defiance, the weight of occupation, and the sheer chaos unleashed will always outweigh the perceived prize. Power has limits, and those limits are not written in treaties, but in the terrain, in the people, and in the inexorable math of consequence. For more analysis that strips away the fiction and focuses on the real-world calculus of power and strategy, stay with us here at Think Cell.